are live. The season's over.
Or it's just beginning, depending on if you're going to be in the playoffs tomorrow. Well, some of them know that they're going to be in the playoffs tomorrow. We certainly, the two teams, the one team that primarily is followed here the most, we know is going to be in, and the second team, and then the third team. The teams we all tend to follow around here are know they're going to be in, which is not necessarily something we can always say. But there's a lot of other, it's kind of funny because similar to last week, there's more intrigue about what's happening outside of the Dakotas because everything here is kind of wrapped up with a bow, with the exception of NDSU, which we'll get to. But I guess that's the perks.
Everybody took care of business like they're supposed to. I mean, the problem games, it should be like this, but it never is the last week. You think you have everything figured out. I thought I had a good idea what the seeds were going to look like. And then the SoCon completely falls apart and everything turned into a whirling dervish. That was a mess outside of the valley because the team's just not taking care of business.
I'm just going to pretend to be shocked right now that the SoCon completely fell apart after arguing with SoCon people for about 48 hours that you didn't deserve anything after not doing anything for a decade, and then you completely crap the bed with your. Now, I did hear there was a quarterback issue that maybe their top quarterback had gotten hurt in that game.
Furman's quarterback was out for the whole game. I think he went down the last game. Actually, but you're playing Wofford. I mean, it's not much better than losing to Western Illinois. If Mark went down, God forbid, and SDSU's playing Western Illinois, I would expect SDSU to still win that game. And the SoCon, sorry, go ahead.
I said that to a couple people. Not only SDSU. I said if the top guy at USD, the top guy at NDSU, top guy at UND, top guy at basically, if top guy for anybody goes down, I think they're going to beat the last, and of course, Western Carolina, who had been top 10 for a while this year, I think in name only, they go down too, and that probably is going to cost them a playoff bid. So, I said this about, I've gone back and forth with SoCon people the last couple of years. I understand some of their point. Obviously they had their conference kind of swiped out from under them 10 years ago when Georgia Southern and App State made the move. And, you can't fault them for making that move. They were prepared for, as I always said, the big difference between up there and up here and down there is those Southern schools are a little bit better positioned to make an FBS move than we are. But they were positioned to make that move and they did, but it cut the heart out of that league and they've not really recovered, and they've always been in a position where their champion seems to get routed to North Dakota State in the heyday.
Right.
But they've also had other chances. It's not like they haven't had other teams, and they don't even get past the second. So you haven't done anything in the playoffs to justify a higher seed. And now you have this golden opportunity to maybe get a 2 seed, at least the 4. And you pull that with, I know there's an injury, but come on, so, if they go out and they've got a chance. If they go out and make a run, more power to them. If you prove it in the playoffs, you deserve more. But until you do, shut up.
Well, and their thing too, is they complain about not getting respect in the polls and the seeds and everything like that. And then they do this. And, Alex Kenkel says, SoCon gonna SoCon used to be a deep conference. It was hard to go undefeated. And nowadays it means we're all mediocre. I would argue that it means we're going to choke. We are going to choke so hard that it shouldn't be allowed in public for kids under 18 to see. And it's so bad. And then they don't schedule out of conference stuff. Like, you're not a respected conference anymore to the level that it used to be because of those teams leaving, like you said, lack of playoff success. So you either have to win in the playoffs, which they complain is not fair because we're on the road, we don't get high seeds, yada, yada, yada. Well, because you do crap like this, and they don't schedule anything difficult out of conference. And, they go, well, we've got so many teams close. Okay. Do you want the respect or not? Do you want to go out and earn the respect or sit around and demand respect you've done nothing to earn so far? That's up to you. So Yeah, so the SoCon just cut themselves down to 2 bids today, in my opinion, with Western Carolina choking because they got their running back. That was supposed to be the reason that they're having a hard time, and now it's a mess. The SoCon is a disaster. I know Brian Thompson saying NDSU doesn't want the 8 seed. I think it might happen unless Matt Larson doesn't want the 8 seed. I think it's going to happen. I think Montana State's going to end up getting the SDSU treatment and not be seeded. You've got rival AD head of the committee, and you've got NDSU's AD on the committee. I do not care what anyone says about, well, they can't talk about their own team. Oh, shut up. We all know they really follow that vow of silence to each other in the entirety of the time. They can't be in the room. They can, okay, so they're not going to talk ever outside of the room. They just never see each other. Come on now. You're really going to believe those fairy tales after all the tomfoolery that came out last year? It just boggles my mind. So I think if Matt Larson wants the 8 seed, they'll get the 8 seed. And there's an argument for it over Montana State, to be honest.
Well, and that's the big question. Do they want to potentially come back to Brookings in what would be the quarterfinal? And I mean, hey, let's be honest. I don't think it's a slam dunk they come to Brookings. They played well the last 2 weeks, and I think a bye week would help them. But I don't think it's a slam dunk they're going to come out of Fargo and win that first game. They still, they haven't. Like I said, they played well, but Southern Illinois has issues, and there's another thing we could talk about. Northern Iowa how much longer are we going to keep going with Farley? I know he's been there forever. I know he's an alum. Not disputing that he's done great things, but this is a pattern, and they're wasting some decent talent there. I know they've got financial issues, but I just think it kind of shows that. I think it shows they really how much priority football is there that they keep doing this. I mean, we have a nice the Holy Smoke banner. I saw that over the thing. No, I think I think North Dakota State would still scare us. I mean, I didn't think the Bison played terrible for where they were 2 weeks ago when they came in here. They didn't play that badly. If they figured some stuff out, and you never know if it's a bad weather game or something here in a couple weeks. I don't think anybody would ever, even as much as the Jackrabbits have kind of owned him, as good as this team is. I don't think you ever feel like, you got this one in the bag if the Bison are coming to town. Plus, we also don't know what the crowds are going to be like for the playoffs. We hope they're going to be better. Maybe the Bison people will rally around it and come down here, especially if they sense that, that SDSU fans aren't showing up for the playoffs. That could be there could be some diciness, but I don't know. I'm also kind of wondering right now, did Furman maybe knock themselves out of the seed altogether? And it's going to raise holy hell, but would they potentially knock themselves out of the seed and say, okay, Montana State and NDSU are 7 and 8? I don't know. And especially if that Furman quarterback is out for long term, because part of the criteria you're supposed to have is how they're playing and how they're positioned going into the tournament. So, if their quarterback if that's the effect their quarterback has of being out, they lose to a 1-9 team, they're not long for this tournament if they can't beat a 1-9 team. So I'm not convinced that they're, it depends. Well, obviously I'm sure they're trying to get a report right now about how if that quarterback's going to be available after a bye week.
It sounds like he'd be available. And I know they do take injuries into account when it comes to that. And it is an awful loss, but it is still a whole holistic resume. And I don't think there's enough teams out there that look like they should be seeds anyways. I mean, who are you going to put in their place? We really only have an argument between 2 teams for the last seed. And those are 3 lost teams that
and I'm still a little sluggish on Idaho just because their last loss was worse than anything Montana State's. Now, if Montana State hadn't just gotten smashed today, I think they would still be in the seed conversation. But to lose that badly to your rival, granted it was in Missoula, and that can happen up there, but to lose that badly just leaves such a horrible taste in your mouth. And I can see how they're just totally out of the seeding, but then. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I guess we should probably first off, because we got a lot of stuff we can talk with the FCS. gotta do our local wrap-ups here first before we get into the whole, because again, the games we had today locally with SDSU first, and then we can get a little into USC, that they went according to plan for the most part. So, this is this is Jackrabbit Illustrated, so you have to kind of start on the Jackrabbits first off, and they took care of business. You have to excuse me as my other computer here starts to play a song for some reason. Very high-tech production I have going on here. No, the SDSU wins 35-17. As a quote to borrow a line from Stig last year, they are not sharing, which we loved. The Jacks outright Valley champs for the second straight year. Third time in 4 years they've won the Valley title. They will be the top seed unless somebody has money or pays somebody off on the committee. I say that jokingly, but that would be about the only way it would happen. Game was pretty much over at half. It was kind of sluggish in the second half. I think some people left for the crowd thinned out a little bit. It definitely felt a little bit of a weird atmosphere in the second half. I think people were kind of ready for it to be over with, and I'm sure Jimmy. I haven't listened to the post-game press conference. In some regards, I don't really need to because I got to go back up there tomorrow for the selection show, so I'm talking to him again. I'm sure he's not happy with the way it ended, but hey, at least it gives him something to kind of chew on and kind of ring at him for, like, hey, we got to be better. But great game from Gronowski, 16-23, 323 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had a run, only the 1 fumble. Isaiah Davis, Mar Johnson got in the end zone. Isaiah, I think he's saving his big play. I think his big games for the playoffs because he hasn't really uncorked the big run or the super long. I thought he was going to have the 200-yard game against NDSU, but he fell short. Only had 85 today. Jaden Yankee is on a real heater right now. He's 10 for 187 today, and that terrific flea flicker at the end, which I got perfectly. I'll try to get that online here in a little bit. Jackson should have had a touchdown as well today too. I thought
that should have been a touchdown.
I thought it looked like one too. I didn't think he stepped out, but I think he's probably a little disappointed about that. But whatever, they all for the team. Not a whole lot of. Like I said, Missouri State had a little bit of success, but it's garbage time. It felt like garbage time. I know it was 21-3, and I know it was 20. Whatever, that game was over. So I don't really. I'm. And again, we'll get to it later. Speaks to me how bad Northern Iowa was because I thought Pasho, however you pronounce his name, made some decent plays and they had some stuff. There were some throws he missed, which I'm just like, how do you miss this? Like, there were some throws he missed I just couldn't believe, and they had no running game. So obviously Missouri State 4-7. Bobby Petrino didn't leave him in the best spot, which is no shock there because Bobby Petrino, very humanitarian. He always leaves every job better than he found it. So,
I will say Missouri State looked better than I expected they would be at this point after Bobby P left them.
I think they did get better during the season. I think you do have to credit them with that much. Obviously, they play. From what I've heard about that Northern Iowa game, they kind of played out of their mind. It was onside kicking with a minute. Well, I've made this joke about that Augustana Mankato game a few weeks ago when it was over and Todd Hoffner kept calling 3 timeouts with 20 seconds left, and Augie threw a touchdown pass over his head to kind of rub it in. So it's never over until the fat lady sings. But no, it was it was like I said, a little sluggish in the second half, but you kind of felt a weird. I was kind of hoping they would do a trophy presentation with the Valley trophy. I don't know if it was there or not. I asked around. I'm sure it'll be there tomorrow. I heard Viverito was not there. So, but I guess I guess they don't do trophy presentations if you have that opportunity. But it's
the Valley. It's the Valley. They just coast on the quality of their teams and repost their stuff, and then post a YouTube clip once in a while. And it's not shocking Patty wasn't there because why would she be? That would be a part of her job description. But not that I'm negative about how the Valley is run or anything when we're getting made look like a D2 conference by the SWAC and MEAC and Ohio Valley and everything else, but it's fine. I'm not bitter. I think this game was very measured. I don't think it was necessary. It wasn't a bad game by any stretch. I don't think it was the best game. Mark had a hell of a game. I know Jim Poppin said it might have been, I think, a career high. game from Mark. Goes 16-23 for 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. That is some yardage per reception on that one, because you look at Peugeot and he's got 23 completions out of 35 attempts. He's got only 261 yards. So, but no, overall, the defense gave up more passing yards than I expected. But I think they buckled down on it. But the second half, Missouri State just took what they were being given. I think there wasn't enough pressure in the beginning of the game by the D-line, but by mid-second quarter-ish, there was a lot of pressure getting in Peugeot's face. So that was good. They took care of business, and that's really what that game was.
Yeah, that's maybe one concern going into the playoffs, is that I did see that a little bit at Youngstown last week, even though there was the shutout. That it did seem like Youngstown had some receivers who were open. They just couldn't quite get the shots. So they've had some. I don't know. I mean, we'll see if there's a big passing quarterback, big passing team that can get the time and get some. I mean, but I think that, as I recall, that was kind of a concern going into last year's playoffs too, and it worked out all right. I mean, it just depends. I think last year it would have been a little dicey if they maybe would have had to see an incarnate word in the title game as opposed to NDSU with the quarterback. I can't remember that guy's name, but that quarterback they had was electric last year. Maybe that comes into play if you have an Idaho, or you have a guy who can really just throw it all over, especially with that receipt with Hatton and McCoy. But
yeah,
I mean, otherwise, I think, yeah, and like Ryan's saying too, Beanham was out for a while. Now they got a bye week to rest up to. Like I said, there've been some, and that's maybe always been a little bit of a knock on the pass, that the pass game can be, I mean, they can't be perfect in every respect, guys. I mean, this is one of the more dominant teams. They're going to have a few flaws, hiccups here and there, but I mean, yeah, I think
only won by 3 scores.
And one of the touchdowns came when they were up 25 with about 2 minutes to go. So,
right.
Whatever. No, it's no, I mean, that was a pretty, and credit South, and also the history as well. This is the first unbeaten, untied season in SDSU history. I didn't know that for certain because I didn't know if there was some 2-0 or 3-0 season in 1899 or whatever, but I heard that on the way back on the radio. I don't know what happened with Beanham. No, I didn't catch that. We'll see. I mean, I'll ask tomorrow, but
I know Jimmy said he's going to be fine.
Got 2 weeks. I mean, unless the season ending, you got 2 weeks now to heal up. So, and I'm sure they'll get plenty of time off. I would say that has to go down. Like I said, the only thing you kind of regret about this season is they just couldn't get that FBS game this year. It would have been great to see.
Yeah,
how this team would have matched up against an F, but otherwise, it certainly has to go down. Well, I still lean a little bit toward last year's team being just a little bit better, just because that one was the tougher regular season jaunt when you had to go to the Fargo Dome and the Unidome. And I mean, this one, but to be fair with this one, they've had so many years in the past where they had this schedule laid out and they found some way to trip up when you thought, oh, it's perfect. They've got everybody coming here. And then somehow it all fell to crap. But, like I said, I mean, obviously if this team goes unbeaten, I think they'll be the greatest team in program history. But I still kind of lean a little bit toward last year's group just because they had the tougher road. And, oh, by the way, you had an NFL tight end too.
Yeah, I mean, did they though? Because this team had to play, 7 straight ranked games this year. And at USD, which has been a troublesome spot when they're a top 5 team. Last year I think we had 4 ranked wins or something like that. So
I think it is fair to say the Valley was better this year. The Valley was better all around. I think because we only got 3 bids last year. It was only SDSU, NDSU, and UND. Obviously, I think that's going to matter that USD has been better, had their best year of all time, and they still went down there and beat them by a ton. The Southern Illinois game, having them back on the schedule was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously, like I said, the FBS thing I still think kind of matters. And if they could have beaten Iowa, I think that would have taken any discussion out of it. And I think they would have beaten Iowa. I've maintained that for a long time. But, yeah, I mean, it's, that's a fun debate to have. And obviously they'll put that to bed if they finish this thing and go 15-0 in another month, almost 2 months basically now with the way things are. But yeah, I think this year definitely the Valley was better, and I think obviously they had a little better schedule too. Last year, they had I think they had Western Illinois in last year's schedule too, if I'm not mistaken. So, you didn't get the layups this year, although there were still some they still made some teams look like layups. They were just that good, I think, and certainly that Montana State game, maybe that kind of, even though Montana State's fallen off, that kind of felt like an FBS game, just because you don't usually get those kind of games in non-conference like this. So it'll be a fun debate to have, but you got to wait and see if this team can finish the deal. But yeah, just
right.
now 25 straight wins. Obviously, if they can win 4 more, they'll be 29, and then we can really have some fun next year if they can get 30, and if they can get that one over Oklahoma State, which now looks a little harder than it did when we were having that discussion about a month ago about, hey, Oklahoma State looks beatable right now. They've been a little better since then.
Right. So I want to address the comment Todd Palmer asked asked about my comment about the Valley being made to look like a D2 conference. For people who haven't followed the B team and stuff during the week, I have a bit of an axe to grind with the media and things that the Valley puts out or doesn't put out, and having Zoom meetings for your media day when you've got, you can look at the Big Sky. They put hype videos out. They push for game day to go to locations and all these things that they do. The Big Sky is the one who spearheaded the FCS game day show on ESPN Plus. All these things, and the Valley is just a conference. They just exist. Is all they do. So that's all my deal there. So hey, thanks for tuning in from Georgia there, Blazer Bobcat. Glad to have you back with us, buddy. But yeah, when it comes to greatness and greatest teams, because you get the argument, you have people trying to argue this already with greatest teams ever in FCS and stuff like that. And you don't know till the season's over. You don't know any of it. You don't know any of the stats that, if you're going to argue, that matter are. You don't know how many NFL players are actually on this team. I see, NDSU fans, well, there was 14 NFL players on this NDSU team. Well, okay, wait until all the guys on this roster graduate, and then we'll see how many NFL guys were on this team. We don't know. I've always been curious about that, Zach, actually. Some of these marker games, how many pros were on the field at one time in these highly ranked marker games. And if somebody, I should do it someday, and take the time and hunt down the 2019, 2018 marker game and go through the rosters and go pro, and count up how many pros people get to watch on the field for these teams, because it's crazy.
It's fair. And then, you never know, too, because you're always thinking of seniors, but then you have to wait another 2 or 3 years to see if some underclassmen in it, because obviously those 18, 19 games, you're right, the Yankees were out there, and they're probably going to be pros. I think, I think Greenfield and McCormick were in the 19 game, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. They're going to be pros. Why would anyone think OSU? Well, they were beatable earlier in the year. They kind of looked a little more beatable, then they got good. But hey, SDSU's beat. Yeah. Long story short, they looked a lot worse before about a month or two ago. Now you never know, but you never know. No, I think the greatness thing is always a good debate, and like you said, I think you made a very good point about the pro thing. We've heard that this team alone could have 10 pros on it. So, but that also varies too. How long is their pro career? Are they just getting a tryout in a camp? Are they getting drafted? So it'll be a long time before we actually know how, that impact, how those things play out. But, certainly from the SDSU standpoint, I think if this, team goes 15-0, you can't say it would be hard to say even the 14-1 team was better. But so, I think from the 15-0 standpoint, I think they would be the best team, but we'll see. The only thing I think, like I said last week, the only thing that I think would be a little tough to measure is the fact they just didn't get that FBS game. But you can't knock them for that, because they couldn't get one. Nobody wanted them. It's getting tougher to get them now, and that's the price of doing business when you get good. Nobody wants to potentially schedule a loss or a team that could actually embarrass them by just competing. So
The flip side, the advantage when you have a stadium the size of SDSU or an NDSU or Montana, you can at least, you're not doing it for the check at that point, because if you're bringing 20,000 people into the stadium plus, you are going to bring in a bigger gate than you would probably get on a lot of these money games. And actually, that's probably part of what makes it difficult to schedule FBS games, particularly for an NDSU or an SDSU, because you're going to ask for a larger guarantee. And if you're an FBS team, why in the hell would you pay more money to have a tough game that there isn't a real possibility you'll drop, and pay more for it than if you could get a Western or Southern Illinois and pay them 200 grand less and have less of a threat? Well, Southern Illinois is a bad example because they beat a couple MAC teams recently, but you get what I'm getting at. It makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that the Montana State game was so rare. And yeah, I saw the comment, Brian. Well, I mean, and frankly, it's not just the NDSU thing. SDSU's been having this problem now because they were, even before they won the national title, they played Minnesota close. The Iowa game last year, obviously, TCU a couple of years ago, even though I know that ended up being like they were in that game going to the fourth quarter. Obviously, they're never going to get a Power 5. They're probably never going to get a Group of 5 game again after what they did to CSU.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just the reality you're in. And I've seen Ron saying, yeah, I mean, I think it was even, in the 80s, I believe it was probably a little closer because it just seems like there's been such more of a divide now with more money going into these power programs that probably is tougher for a lot of, let's make no mistake here. As good as NDSU and SDSU have been, none of them are saying, let's go play Alabama or Georgia right now and we can go beat them. No. And NDSU was always smart in that regard when they were scheduling. As much as their fans may have wanted to say, hey, we want to go play those guys, they knew if they went and did that, they would get smashed and maybe even permanently, because we talked about how physical that Iowa game was and how that really beat SDSU up. Imagine if you did that against a Georgia or an Alabama or, whoever else is even higher tier.
Just did.
Well, and those guys, I mean, those are paycheck games too. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's, and I remember a couple of years ago, Georgia Southern, I think actually when they were still FCS played, I want to say Alabama, they played them well in it was like 2006 or 7. So it wasn't that long ago. And then they went to the playoffs and nearly, I think, made a decent little run. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely not as much as we were saying, like, well, the Southern Conference should go scheduling all the Valley teams. I'm like, there's not as much incentive for the Valley team. And I don't know that some of these Southern Conference teams can afford to fly up to Brookings and Fargo and Missoula, and those are long trips to fly to. So, and I don't think they would. I don't think any of them here would want to do it unless it's a home and home. Unless you can, I mean, we know SDSU's going back to Southeast Louisiana here, so they're going to fulfill that deal. So we know Jacks are willing to travel. I know the Coyotes are going down to Lamar next year, so it's not that these teams aren't willing to go down and travel to the South. I know the Bison went out to Delaware not long ago. It's not that they're not willing to travel, but I don't think we've heard that Incarnate Word game, which hasn't been announced yet officially, but I don't believe that's a home and home yet. I don't think there's unless they're planning to try it. I don't think they're going down to San Antonio. So yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of those SoCon. I mean, the only one I've heard of with a SoCon team, I know NDSU and the Citadel have a series I think planned, which is a home and home. Which unfortunately for the SoCon, the Citadel has fallen on hard times. So that's probably not going to go well.
Citadel's usually on hard times, unfortunately. I think it's a bigger deal for these Southern teams to travel, because when you're a Midwestern team like SDSU, NDSU, the distance for your regular game requires a flight. It just is what it is, or a Big Sky team. And the general consensus is once you're flying, it's a flight's a flight is a flight, and it doesn't really matter outside of time zones that you're crossing. So, but when you're these SoCon teams, they can bus to most of their games if they want to. And, or the CAA, same deal. The Ivy Leagues, I would kill to have a home and home with Harvard. That would be so fun for SDSU, but it'll never happen. Or Princeton.
By the way, Ron, we're not saying they have the best team of all time. We're saying they're going to be in the conversation as one of the greatest teams of all time. We're not going there yet.
No,
I'm saying they get. I'm saying probably if SDSU had played an FBS team and beaten them, I think then you would have maybe had them in the conversation. But, they didn't get their shot at a Michigan or they didn't get their shot at an Iowa again. But, yeah, just to be clear, I know
down 10 to 20, Ron.
Yeah, I know my FCS history. And as I've said this, we said this last week too. For me, the greatest of all time probably is going to stop with Marshall and Randy Moss, because Randy Moss.
Yep. and Chad Pennington.
And Chad, that's probably it. But there's a lot of other teams. I think SDSU will be in a conversation if you were drawing up a top 20, top 50 list or whatever. But yeah, it's not exactly they're not going to be the number one team of all time in FCS history, but they'll be in a conversation, I think. And again, we also know the subdivision has gotten watered down, unfortunately, through no fault of SDSU's or anybody's. But
to be clear, when we said best of all time, we meant for South Dakota State.
Yes,
South Dakota State history,
South Dakota State's
history. So that's a big deal.
Well, to wrap up, moving on from SDSU's game today, because there's not a whole lot more to talk about with Mo State. The Jacks will learn the 11:30 selection shows tomorrow. We've known for a while this is going to be the number one team. No problem, Ron. We just want to make that clear and now you don't have to worry type so much now about the whole thing while your phone's dying too, so you can just enjoy the conversation. But we've known SDSU is going to be number one for a while, and the one we didn't know, but we feel pretty confident now, is that USD is probably going to be the number 3. And they will. I would be shocked if they're not at this point, because they did what we expected to today. They beat Western Illinois. Say farewell to the Leathernecks, who go out their final year 0-11. That's like 24 straight losses now, or something along that line for them. 48-6. They were actually down 6-3 for a minute there in the first quarter. So there was maybe a sliver of doubt. I knew some USD fans who were just a little worried. You did have a little reason to be worried after you saw what happened with Furman. So like I said, I tweeted it. I'm like, okay, here's your incentive, because now the 3 seed is there for you, but there's also the reminder you got to take these guys seriously or you could lose. But nope, USD took care of business, pretty much limited them the rest of the way after that. And it's what you expected. Nobody really, there's not much, they're off. They ran for a lot of yards. Nate Thomas finally was back in the lineup, which I don't know where he's been. Maybe they're just saving him for the playoffs, but he had a 100-yard game. They had another guy who I haven't seen all year run for almost 100, which I guess is kind of a theme with Western. There's always somebody who's going to run for something against Western that you've never heard of. Aiden Bauman looked good throwing the ball. Carter Bell had a big game. They did what they had to do, and then obviously, I don't know if they saw the scoreboard. I don't know if they were any scoreboard watching or if they knew, but when Furman lost, that opened the door. And to be clear, in my mind, at least before today, before that Brawl of the Wild game, I had said that I felt the 4 best teams were the South Dakota schools, and the Montana schools. And, obviously Furman helping that. I think, Brian, I don't think you're wrong, Brian, but I just don't think they're going to knock the team that won the Big Sky down. I don't think you're necessarily wrong, but I just don't think they're going to do it. I mean, it's because, Montana's loss technically USD is a 1-loss FCS team. Obviously, their other loss was to a very good Missouri team who's now ranked like 9th in the FBS playoffs. So it's not like they, and they didn't get smashed like 50-0. They actually they showed some fight in that game. But it was, but Montana's played better. I mean, you can't say Montana. They look like a joke. They look like a joke early in the season. They've turned some things around. I don't know that they're going to, especially when the committee chair is the Montana AD. We've talked about all these backroom dealings. I just don't. I think there's a case for it, but I don't know how it's going to happen.
You look at it this way, and Brian, you like to say 12 spots higher strength of schedule than Montana. Okay, take Missouri out of that, and their strength of schedule will be where you're guaranteed that Missouri game will bump your strength of schedule at least 10 spots minimum. Like they'll be even, if not less than even. And, I know Matt's saying Montana State played us closer than USD. How should they be ranked higher? Well, rankings are not just defined off of how you played South Dakota State. And as Montana is a shining example of, it's teams change throughout the year. Like teams get better, and specifically good teams get better. This SDSU team right now is better than the SDSU team at the beginning of the year. You can see it. The offensive line gel is better. The defensive line play is light years ahead of what it was. All sorts of that stuff. You can think Montana State is harder to beat than USD. That's fine. Here's the problem. Montana State didn't beat anybody. Their best win is one win against 7-4 Sac State, who hasn't beat a good team at all. They haven't beat a single good team besides Stanford, who's not a good team. So Montana State is 100% SDSU 2021. They're going to be on the road. They're probably going to win a bunch of games because I think we all believe they're a better team. But it doesn't matter what you believe. It's what you've done at this point. This isn't week 2 where, well, I think this team's good. You are what your record says you are at some point. I think I don't remember whose quote that was. It was a famous NFL coach, but you are what your record says you are at some point. Just because you're close when you lose does not make you a good team. What makes you a good team is winning. So I put bigger value on good wins. And while USD might have one more ranked win than Montana and they have a better loss, I don't care if they have a better loss if they're similar teams and Montana has 2 or 3 top 10 wins and USD has 2 or 3 top 25 wins. And honestly, and when it's that close, eye test does matter a little bit. And Montana is the hotter team. USD has been squeaking by. It just is what it is. And I think that Montana will get the 2 seed. That, and I don't think the committee loves having the same conference get the 1 and 2 seed. I don't see that happening. So that's my little tirade on USD over Montana deal there.
Well, and I think we'll close the coyote portion of this with one interesting question I have before we get into the seeding thing here. And I think there's a fun debate because I think the postseason awards will come out here pretty soon. Not that these make a ton of difference to much more beyond the media and the fans, but who do we have? And I know I know what platform I'm on, so I have an idea of what many people might say, but who would we have as the Valley Coach of the Year, Rogers or Nielsen at this point? I mean, I put that question out there for everybody right now. Is it Jimmy with the undefeated team, although we knew this was going to be that good of a team, but you're still taking over as the first-year head coach. There's a lot of pressure. You go 11-0, or is it Nielsen having to shuffle everything up, going from 3-8 to 9-2? I mean, that's, honestly, what do you I know I'm on an SDSU platform primarily, but who do we think is the Valley Coach of the Year? Who do we think is Valley Coach of the Year right now? I'll leave it out there for you guys first.
I think it's going to go to Nielsen. It probably should go to Josh Davis. I think it should go to Josh Davis because, or you could say Nielsen for being smart enough to get an SDSU coach on his squad. But the reality is, you take a team that had the record they had that year. Granted, bad schedule. There was a bunch of things that snowballed, but you turn that around into a top 3 seed. They'll get a top 4 seed. That is he's got to be the coach of the year. And as much as it makes me vomit in my mouth a little bit, but let's be honest, this is kind of Nielsen's MO. When he was at Western, he would have a good team every 4 to 5 years that would.
Well, he was only there 3 years. He was only there for 3 years.
Right. You're right. So, but he had the one good team that he built up to, and then comes to USD, cycled up, had the Stravely year, went back down, cycled up to this year. And I'm not saying it's going to go away. That's still to be determined, but I think he should definitely win the Coach of the Year, as gross as that is to say.
I will say, and obviously I'm a little more unbiased, but I'm appreciate you. You take. I think that's the right pick. I think if it weren't for that situation of just if it had been from 3-8 to 4, then maybe I would have gone with Jimmy, just because 3. Because again, I said this online to some people today. I'm like, I don't think they were as bad as that record indicated a year ago. There was a lot going on that you even kind of alluded to it there, and there's a lot that we can't even really necessarily say in public. But there was a lot that went on with that program, but a lot of people kind of felt that there's more here. They shouldn't be this bad. So, but to get them to 9-2, and again, we know I know somebody else here said the FCS the whole FCS is mediocre. I don't tend to think of it as necessarily as that. I think it's just SDSU looks that good compared to everybody else. We know it's watered down with some of the teams that have left, but let's be honest. This SDSU team is still going to be good next year, but this is a freaking powerhouse team that has everybody back. They should be to this level, and they are. We'll see what happens next year. I think they're still going to be a very good team. It's going to be 9 to 10 win range. I don't know if they're going to be perfect, but we'll see what happens. Let's just say it might not look as mediocre next year if SDSU's playing a few closer games. And even this year, they played the Montana State game, the Southern Illinois game. It hasn't been a total walk in the park for this team. So, yeah, I think Nielsen gets Coach of the Year just for the turnaround. And, I don't know what will happen for them in the playoffs. Like I said, they're going to have a high seed, which is totally unexpected. I could see them losing that first game right away because NDSU could well get funneled to their region if they're, who knows at this point. But, they could lose the first game or they could win that game, get enough confidence, and make a run to the semifinal and play Montana. I don't know. But, either way, from what they've done, I think it's a pretty good start for them. They'll have a lot of people back. They should have Bauman unless he, gets a hair under his butt and decides to try to go back to the FBS. And as I've said to a lot of people, and we said this at the start of the year, really shouldn't be that hard to be a 7 to 8 win team in the Valley. You don't have to be a 9 to 10 win team. I don't know if the Coyotes can do that every year yet. So I don't know if this will be something that we see every year going forward from them, but they should at least start to be in that range where they're 7 to 8 wins and consistently in the playoff mix. I don't know, if they start building some depth. I know I saw a kid out of Jefferson committed, so I think that's some of the Josh Davis effect right there, is that they're clearly targeting more South Dakota kids than they ever did before. I'm not saying they're getting guys over SDSU, but at least they're targeting them. So they're definitely changing the way, and I think that's healthy for them. So yeah, I think they're in a better place, and I think they're at least in a position where they can, as we saw this year, the FCS is not at a position where it's impossible. 10 years ago, I think this would have been a lot harder to do, and I think that's why it took SDSU so much longer, because the FCS was so much harder to break through. Now it's a different story, but we know, like I said, now we know pretty much everything is at the time. Now I know a lot of people are still here as we're about 40 minutes into this thing. We got a lot of people around the nation, I think, are tuning into this because we're probably one of the only programs that covers FCS football doing anything. So now let's take the macro view of this, because it is basically SDSU and everyone else, it feels like. We know the top 3. We feel like we know that. If it's not SDSU, Montana, and USD, we're going to be stunned tomorrow. And if for some reason USD flipped over Montana, I don't think that would be that shocking. It's going to be those 3 teams. Question is, what the hell is it going to look like after that? And it's a good luck. Good luck.
Yeah. I tend to agree with Sam Herder, and I'm going to throw it up on the screen here from his article he threw out before he went to his wedding dance, what sort of friend of Sam Herder's, knowing what he does, schedules your wedding during football season? Get your goddamn life together. How about it? But
I got to say, my anniversary is tomorrow. My anniversary is tomorrow, so we did have that. We had our wedding when they clinched the first shared Valley title back in 2016 at the Unidome. I think we were listening when one of the I can't remember which lineman returned that touchdown at the Unidome when they pasted him there. But so yeah, and then the next morning we woke up and saw them get their first seed. So the selection show. So that was kind of fun, but a little different now. It's that's definitely I got, and I saw Sam also tweet out that they're getting like the most site traffic they've ever had. So it kind of goes to show you that A, we know they do good work, but B, it's like Yeah, there's still a lot of interest in this subdivision, despite the fact that it's supposedly watered down and all these teams have left. I think that goes to show that, I don't think it's necessarily great for the subdivision that all the James, Matt, Kellen, Solik. Thank you, Jim. I couldn't remember. I knew it was a South Dakota kid. I couldn't remember who. I wanted to say I couldn't remember who it was. But even though it isn't necessarily for the best that all these teams left the subdivision, I think it's probably, there's a lot more fan bases that feel they have a shot now. Just is. Yeah. Even the SoCons, we rip them, but they feel they've got the shot. USD felt they had a shot. That's on the whole, that is good for the division, even if you hate to see some of those power teams leave.
Well, and if you look at these seeds, and you're right, I think the extra interest helps a lot. That's a big deal. Montana being up this year is a big deal. That adds a lot of traffic. The growth that SDSU's had as a fan base is a big deal. All that jazz. But if you look at the seeds that Sam has, I tend to agree. Albany at 4, they're 9-1 against the FCS. They beat Villanova head-to-head. So you probably should have them over Villanova. Idaho, with their losses, they only have 2 FCS losses, but one of them's bad. And then you had a second one because Albany's loss isn't great either. But you have the second loss in there, then, I think you go with Albany. Idaho with its FBS win and its win over Montana State, that's going to put them at probably 5. I agree with that. Villanova at 6 makes sense. They're 9-1 CAA team. It makes sense to have them over a Furman who just completely pissed all over themselves today. And then the one I disagree with is Montana State. And we talked about this before the show, but I do not, I think I've been pretty plain about my thoughts on the committee. I have no faith in them at all to follow whatever malarkey they throw out there, because last year they just did whatever the hell they wanted. And then Kent Haslam came on and had an interview with Sam Herder and talking about the bid for the scandal with the bid over UND, and UND had 4 times the bid they put in over Weber, and they gave Weber the home game anyways. He didn't back down from that or say that was a one-off. It was just a special circumstance. He doubled down and said, oh, it's been done before, and basically said, you guys just didn't find out about it, so it's not a big deal. What? That's your response? I have no faith in you guys to do this properly whatsoever. But beyond that, if you look at it, for number 8, Montana State, head of committees, Montana's AD. Matt Larson is also on the AD. If I go through the seeds, the potential seeds, I only see one other real possible. I really only see one other possible 8 seed out there, and it's NDSU. The way they finished, they've got ranked wins. The big win over Southern Illinois, big win over UNI. Even if UNI is going to be 6-4, that's still going to count as a ranked win. And Montana State doesn't have ranked wins. They have 1 ranked win and a bunch of close losses. And if it's arguable and they can get away with it, do you really think Montana is going to be like, oh yeah, let's give that? Unless their theory is we want to send them to Brookings right away. I absolutely see the committee being able to finagle going NDSU as the 8 seed, so they get the bye and all that stuff, get their guaranteed home game. A little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's not hard to fathom. Last year, NDSU got a seed that was higher than Montana State when arguably they shouldn't have. Montana State really probably should have been the 2 seed. I do agree with that argument that was had last year. And NDSU got the higher seed, and then Montana got in when they shouldn't have been in the bracket, but they got in, and the committee goes, well, we did consider the bid they were going to put in, which also is a thing that's not supposed to happen. They're not supposed to open these bids, but we knew it was going to be a big bid, and they can't. To come out and say it is the absurd part. Everybody knew it, but to say the quiet part out loud was just breathtaking. So this has been done before. It happened last year. So I absolutely, the only reason I would see Montana State getting the 8 seed is because NDSU wants nothing to do with going to Brookings. And so Brian's mad at me. It's just how I see it, buddy.
He's been going at you for about the last 2 minutes on this.
That's all right. Sorry, man. But I'm just he does not want the 8 seed. And I get it. Listening to Zach McKinnell's show, Blue Bloods, he's not wrong. And this is gonna come off so arrogant. And I hate the level of arrogance that some SDSU fans have shown on pages like FCS Fans Nation and stuff. It's kind of very NDSU-esque and it's driving me bonkers. However, these are Zach's words, not mine. I just happen to agree with them. Getting sent to Brookings in the playoffs is going to be a death sentence for teams. This team, like you said, I think Isaiah's saving his big runs for the playoffs. Isaiah's always had another gear in the playoffs. I think this whole team is going to have another gear in the playoffs. But Isaiah specifically, I mean, that's when he's had his most earth-shattering runs have been rivalry games and the playoffs. And now it's coming, and this is going to be this team's last run. I don't think they're going to take a single game for granted, and it's going to be a nightmare for whoever gets sent to Brookings. Garrett says playoffs day is another manimal and all that stuff. He looks hurt at the end of the game. Hurt and injured are two different things. He might have been banged up at the end of the game. I don't know. But you know what? That's why you get the bye, baby. Let people heal up. That's why it's important. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I will say for Charlie Mitchell, who says Montana will be the number 1 seed. Charlie, you lost to Northern Arizona. Not happening. Now, for what that was, I don't know if that guy's kidding or not, but look, to be honest with you, being the number 1 or the number 2 really does not matter because if you're the number 1 or number 2, you get home field throughout. Just means maybe you have a tougher draw. It doesn't really matter. Being the 1 or the 2 gets you home field throughout. You're fine. Being the 2 is just as good as being the 1. But when you lose to Northern Arizona and the other team's undefeated, you're not getting the number 1. So just deal with it, friend. Go win the national title when you play them, and then you can say how Bobby's back, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, on to the more relevant part of it. I do kind of agree with – I'm reading a little more because I've got the same article that I'm reading a little more of Sam's – explanation on why he believes Montana State should get that 8 seed, and it's hard not to disagree with him. I mean, obviously, now Montana State's they do take into account the fact the top 10 wins at the time. Now I know one of Montana State's top 10 wins, I think fell off. So, obviously it doesn't look as good now, and certainly Sacramento State doesn't look as good now. There's even the point of comparing the SDSU games and the fact that Montana State was an inch away from. Guy drags the foot an inch sooner, and we have a completely different conversation right now, whereas NDSU was never really in their game except for the first quarter. NDSU still has that ugly loss to UND on the resume. But I'm just also kind of I want to look at man, today I'm looking at this Montana State game, the Montana game, and I don't know if it's fair to judge them on just the one game. And you're right, that was months ago. But the UND game wasn't that long ago either. I mean, that's still only about a month. I mean, I'm looking just at what happened today in Missoula. Excuse me, I almost said Bozeman. I mean, I think basically Montana kind of got out right away and pretty much just had their way with them from the jump. I mean, it was 17-0 right away, and it was basically almost over from the jump in Missoula. So I don't know if it's obviously that changed. Montana State's not a comeback team with the way they want to play. And it reflects in their numbers. I mean, Malott had to pass. He was 4 of 13 for 67 yards and a touchdown and a pick. Chambers, I don't know if he got hurt. He did nothing. He was 0 of 3 and he ran for negative 17 yards. So Malott had some decent running. I mean, they obviously got completely taken out of their game by getting down that big early. And it was just a Montana romp. So, I mean, how much if it had just been a closer game, I think I would have given them the 8th seed. I would have had no problem keeping them in the seed line. What does this say about where they're headed? Is Montana this good? That's the question I think the committee, and like you said, there's certainly some of the backroom dealing going on and some of those conversations. I don't know. I hate to see Montana slip completely out of it because I do feel like they are one of the 8 best teams. And they were also 1 field goal kick away from maybe beating Idaho. It's just, but they are what they are right now. And you're right, they don't really, their resume now does not look as good as it did, certainly as it did a few weeks ago. And I'm not really that. NDSU still doesn't impress me. I mean, they got the win over Southern Illinois, but Southern Illinois was not I don't think they were a top 10 team last week, were they? They weren't in the top 10 after they lost to USD. They fell out.
Yeah.
So they fell out. So that loss, I mean, who is NDSU's best win, right? Is it still Central Arkansas? I don't know. I mean,
probably Southern Illinois.
Probably. I mean, is that
they'll
really
be a playoff team?
They're going to be a playoff team, but is that really enough to put you in the seat? I mean, and again, this speaks to also the fact that, again, there's a lot of parity. It's whether you want to call it parity, mediocrity, just whatever you want to call it. I don't like their resume is not that strong either, but they are playing well right now. I don't think they played that badly at SDSU. They came out with some fight. They got overwhelmed in the end. And then, after a shaky first half against SIU, they put them away. And then today just ran all over. And I saw somebody else mention Austin P too. I've seen them as well. They're certainly a candidate. They're 9-1 against the FCS, but they only have 1 ranked win. I think their strength of schedule is 28th, and their 1 loss was to SIU, and it was a big loss. So I don't think they're really a candidate for that 8th seed unless the committee really wants to make everybody feel special. Again, unless they don't want to favor one conference over the other, I don't think they're in the mix for that 8th seed seriously at this point. Montana State's strength of schedule is certainly better. It's 5th compared to 13th. A lot of the numbers favor Montana State, but the eye test right now for both teams, and like we said, some of those politics certainly do not seem to. I got to read this. So
he wants nothing to do with Brookings. I get it. Zach from Blue Bloods had a good comment about the at-large bids, and that's going to be a mess. I don't think the thing for me is I don't think anybody's put themselves. Well, no. Now that I think about it, Western Carolina, I think, took themselves out, and they would have been one of your last 4 in potential type teams. You got Richmond, Delaware. I think they probably both get in. It's going to come down to, I think, like a Youngstown State and an Incarnate Word. And Incarnate Word has no business even saying the word playoffs on their college campus. They've been that sad. I think North Carolina Central will probably get in. Some of these teams losing today has opened the door for NCCU to I think they might be comfortably in. I just got this nasty feeling that a team that is more deserving, like a Youngstown State, who my general opinion on Youngstown State is win an 8th game. Like, come on. Quit crying all the time. Win an 8th game, especially when you schedule as you do out of conference.
I'm not all that high on Youngstown. I don't think that. It's the same thing. And again, this just goes to the fact that I don't think anybody has nobody's really separated themselves that well. But Youngstown's best win is Southern Illinois. They smashed them, okay. But what then? They're non-conference. Obviously you don't punish them for losing to Ohio State. Their non-conference was Robert Morris and Valpo. Again, as we were saying, and I've said this with USD because I know people have kind of made that criticism. You don't have to kill yourself in the non-conference with your schedule, but you shouldn't just schedule that much of a patty cake thing. Geez, especially if you think you're a bubble team, it probably wouldn't hurt to schedule a good, at least a halfway decent team that you feel like is going to be maybe a help for your playoffs. So, again, Southern Illinois is going to get in, but that's mainly on the strength of them having an FBS win. Southern Illinois doesn't really have any impressive wins right now either. I mean, and again, none of these 7-win teams are perfect. I mean, if UND was 1 point, you could make the argument UND doesn't really belong in because they have played like garbage, flat garbage since they beat NDSU. It feels like that was their Super Bowl, and they just decided, and they might as well just hang a banner the way they played ever since that game. I mean, they got a little lucky to win today. But they're going to get in because obviously NDSU's in, and they got the 7 wins, and it is what it is there. But I mean, they're not playing. There's no reason. I mean, maybe they'll be at home for their playoff game too. I've even seen the projection where they could get Drake, who, oh, by the way, we should probably too. I'll probably refresh this here in a minute, but Drake is in the playoffs, kids. I know that's going to surprise some SDSU fans who have been paying attention, but they got the auto bid to the Pioneer League. They have not lost actually since that 70-7 annihilation of by the Jacks at Target Field. They had one of their wins was a Hail Mary against USD, and not the USD you're thinking of. It's the University of San Diego. So they're in the playoffs, I believe, that's the first bid they've ever had. I would expect them to be playing North Dakota or North Dakota State if the Bison don't get a seed. Maybe Montana State if Montana State doesn't get a seed. And whoever, you'll see them maybe getting, whoever they play could get funneled into Vermilion, maybe into Brookings. But right now, the auto bids that we have, obviously we know SDSU, Montana. The Big South OVC is Gardner-Webb. Villanova won the CAA. Duquesne is in the Northeast. Lafayette is in the Patriots. So Holy Cross, who, boy, there was a lot of pub for them this year. They did not even get in, which kind of, frankly, stings because I wanted to see Sluka one more time, but that will not happen. Furman, despite falling on their face, is still in because the SoCon is still the SoCon. Nichols State out of the Southland, and that UAC league is Austin P. So those are all your at-large teams. Again, that doesn't mean they're going to be the seeded teams. Those are just the teams that get the automatic bids for their conferences. So, but yeah, those are all the – and then, of course, you get the 14 at-large bids that will be in as well. So,
yeah.
So that's the rundown there. But, yeah, I mean, it's – yeah, and hey, Brian, you said that, yeah, we would assume somebody's going to beat Drake, but I've seen – there was a couple years San Diego a couple times beat Cal Poly. I mean, you want to talk about where you want to talk about a program that has gone from decent to the floor. You can trace where it started with Cal Poly. I think the year they came up, one of the years they came up here and won, that year in 2016 when they came here. And I'm gonna want to double check this now. It's gonna bring bad memories up for Jackrabbit fans, but of course they came here the first year of the Dana. Non-conference game, and they ran that triple option crap the whole way. I remember Goddard had an unbelievable game. He had like a game where he had people hanging off him, and they still lost this game to them. It probably was the reason they had to go to Fargo for the quarterfinals when they lost. I think they lost to San Diego. They unseated the Pioneer League team in the playoffs. That if not that year, they did later on, but they have lost to San Diego. So Pioneer League teams have won. Yeah, I get it. It's not the best look for the league for the FCS that the non-scholarship league is in it. But do we really need another at-large bid when you're up to 24 teams? I mean, there are people trying to say that it needs to expand more. I think the fields, we got enough. I mean, we don't need do we really need 6-5 Northern Iowa right now after the way they played? I mean, good God. Do we really want to let another team that's – I think, I've got no problem with letting a Pioneer League team in. It's, it's the first round. None of them are probably going to go – if they pull an upset, more power to them. Some of them have been competitive in these playoffs. And then if they get to the second round, then they get smashed. But whatever.
I mean, if you look at it, I think people look at it the wrong way a little bit when they look at the FCS playoffs a little bit. Oh, it's to determine a national champion. It is absolutely 100% determined on the field. But what is part of what makes that so great? Ben, shut up. What is part of what makes the FCS playoffs great is If you win your conference, you get a shot at a national title. Whether or not your conference is good, bad, ugly, or in between, you get a shot. It's like the NCAA big dance for football in a way. I don't understand people who get mad. I'm not watching. I mean, I don't expect a lot of the first round games to be great games. I'm watching for the upsets. Do you expect the first round of the NCAA tournament to be all great games? No. You've got the 64th ranked team playing Duke. Of course, they're not going to all be good games. But guess what? Sometimes Duquesne upsets Towson and comes to Brookings. And how that was such a fun weekend watching that stuff happen in a hurricane out in Towson. That was amazing. And on that same token, I still think people just don't understand that you have to have auto bids. It's an NCAA sanctioned championship tournament. If that is an NCAA rule, you have to allow auto qualifiers from conferences that follow the qualifications as a conference to have one. You have to let them in. It doesn't matter how good they are. And if that goes away, so does your ticket to the big dance. And for me, I like seeing these different teams. Like you said, do we want to see a 6-5 Iowa in Northern Iowa instead of Drake? Like, who cares? That's huge for Drake to get in. Northern Iowa at 6-5 isn't going to go any further. Oh, the game will be a little better. Who really gives a rip that the first round game is better? The games in the second, quarters, semis, finals are going to be fun games, and that's what matters. And that's my favorite thing. Exactly. I love chaos. It's so fun. I'm so pumped
as
for
long
the
as
first round.
it doesn't hit SDSU.
Right. But you're spot on. Yeah, as long as it doesn't hit SDSU. But I love the first round. I love SDSU having a seed as much for the team to have the week off and the advantage of home field. But selfishly, I like it for myself so I can sit at home and flip through these games and just watch the tournament. It's so fun. It's football all day, like from like noon until 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock if you have a Big Sky team in there at night and they schedule it at night. I just get puzzled when people are so mad. I think the tournament is the perfect size. Expanding it is extreme, but 24, it leaves you room. God forbid if the Ivy League ever decides to accept their auto bid, they can. You don't have more auto bids than at larges in that scenario, but you have enough at larges to get all the teams that really deserve to make it in. Now, the 16 bracket tournament, you could argue there was some teams left out that had potential for a run because of an injury early in the season, whatever. That the 2014 bracket, you don't have that argument anymore, I don't think, and it's kind of perfect.
I agree there. And I will say this because I want to see this. It was going to drive me nuts if I didn't say it. And this will add to that whole upset thing. Jim, it was Cal Poly who came here in 2016. It wasn't Davis. It was Poly who came here September 17th, 2016. They beat the Jacks 38-31 in front of a big crowd at Dana J. The funny thing about that year was the week before they came to Brookings, they beat San Diego 38-16 in San Luis. And sure enough, and in fact, the week after they beat SDSU, they beat Montana by a point. And so, anyways, the end of the season, they end up playing that Thanksgiving weekend. They played San Diego again, which you would think, okay, they're going to win, and they lost 35-21 in the rematch. So yes, there are occasionally some rematches, by the way, in the playoffs, but that goes to your point of literally, you never know. I think that was actually the first case of a Pioneer League team winning a playoff game. I think San Diego won another one another year or two later. But yeah, literally San Diego team that got their doors blown off in September by that team goes back and beats them by 14. And that really started kind of the downfall of Cal Poly football. They were a really good program for a number. I think they lost their coach a year later or so, but that's just kind of off on a tangent there because I knew that was going to bug me if I didn't figure that out. But no,
just quick, Brian, I'll take your beard bet. Done.
And yeah, the guy. Yeah, I do have kid. We do have kids. I'm still working. I got to finish posting all my show stuff tonight. But he's
so
in
no
bed
snitching
right
on him on anybody here. No snitching on Zach. I'll find you.
Well, apparently Stig. This is true. I was actually at the game today. Stig apparently heard that we do this and apparently said it's getting good reviews. So he's like,
"Oh my gosh!"
So Stig likes it. I'm like,
"Oh no way!"
He's like, I've heard good things about you, Zach. I'm like, well, that's first because nobody ever says good things about me. So I was like wondering where this is coming from, and then I was like, oh, that's a pleasant surprise. Yeah. So apparently we are being heard somewhere. Right. Hopefully they're enjoying us. I mean, I'm guessing we're one of the only FCS reaction shows that is going. No, we're not doing a 24-hour.
Yes, we are. We'll do it. I'm gonna mainline coffee on an IV here, and we're just gonna.
You're gonna watch me as I'm driving home tonight. I still gotta post all my highlights and stuff. No, it's but yeah, no, I think I'm looking at some of the other brackets too. I'm also. I know Izzo's posted his up in Fargo, and he has NDSU as the 8th seed, which, again, I think that's flip-floppable at this point. I would, like I said, part of me does wonder if Furman might just get bounced all the way out. That would not shock me. Yeah, hot mic. We've had a little feedback too. That's on my end because I don't have a very good mic, by the way.
Oh, I think you meant Dom Izzo's show.
Oh, hot mic.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice.
I thought you were saying our mic was too loud.
Sorry for my language, Stig, if you are listening. I am who I am.
Holy nutmeg.
Yeah.
I got to apologize for mine, too. I think I've used a few curse words, even though I'm a TV guy and I'm not supposed to. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Well, I guess I think that 8th. I mean, I could see Furman getting completely knocked out. Like we said, I love you love the khaki shorts. I did wear the shorts today on the sideline. It's 60 degrees, almost 60 degrees. It's 60 degrees. It felt perfect. I did not. Again, I also, for those of you who don't know, I worked in Fargo for 4 years from 2006 to 10. So a lot of the times I was in the domes anyway. But 60 degrees feels like summer up there. You're not getting 60 degrees in November. So I don't regret the decision I had today because man, it was nice. I did not feel cold for 1 minute. And it was perfect today. So I love that decision.
I was a hobbit up in the stands today because I wore winter boots because it was like 23 degrees at the start of tailgating and I didn't want cold feet. But I didn't bring tennis shoes to change into. Matt Kroll asked how the tailgating crowd was. It was good. It wasn't, normal good, but it was still good. But I had to kick my boots off because my feet were so hot and I was stripped down to a t-shirt because the east side bleachers are money this time of year because it is so warm on that side of the stadium from the sun. I had to kick my boots off and walk around in my socks because my feet were so damn hot.
And Zach, to be clear, obviously they're in the bracket because they got the auto bid. No, I'm just saying I think they should still be seeded. I think that 7 range is about right. I'm just curious as to what's going on with their injury situation. We're hearing reports that quarterback should be back, especially after a bye week. But man, if he is out long term, of course, if he is out long term, maybe they're trying to fudge that, knowing that. But if the committee is taking into account these kind of things, and they couldn't beat a 1-9 team with their backup quarterback, I don't know how I wouldn't give him a seed. I wouldn't give him if he's out long term. Now, how do you know that? How can you tell? I don't know. And if they are trying, can you hide that? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm sure they're making some calls, but I could see them. It's going to raise holy hell down south. I know that. And they still have, you're right, they still have ranked wins. Now, and like we said, we kind of all debated how good were those. Should those teams have really been, should Western Carolina have really been ranked, I think, in the top 10 at times this year? Probably not, but I don't know. I think they'll still be a 7 seed. It was by far, it was the worst loss of the day. But like I said, I think I'm more curious about what this quarterback situation is. If he's really hurt, And those, it's the same thing we hear of the NCAA basketball tournament. They're supposed to take into account injuries and how teams are playing going into it. Okay, well, it's one thing to lose to a 1-9 team, but if your number one quarterback's out, how far can you really expect to go, especially after you just lost to a 1-9 team? But yeah, I would say they're probably still a 7. But if for some reason they did get bounced completely out, then I think it opens up the door for maybe NDSU and Montana State are the 7 and the 8. I don't know, but Montana lost to Northern Arizona. Yeah, I think the Montana lost to Northern Arizona is not as bad. No. I think Northern Arizona still won 5. I think they actually won today. I think it's not a great loss. I think they still won 5 games.
They clipped a couple decent teams. Not great, but Wofford is a 1-win team this year, and they're like a bad 1-win team. It was borderline losing to Western Illinois bad. Zach, if you want, or McKinnell, you want to jump on, I'll shoot you a link. You can chop it up with us for sure. He's on Sports Illustrated for people who don't know. He's on Sports Illustrated under FCS Central and also Blue Bloods podcast. If you want to listen to his thoughts, he's always got a great wrap-up show, especially if you want to know about the HBCUs. My man has got that cover on lock. Coach Fred down there from Alcorn State actually does the show with him, which is pretty cool. So plug for Zach on that one, because he's a good long form show to listen to if you got an hour or so to kill.
I think what's his name, Coach Poe? Am I pronouncing that right? Pough at South Carolina State. I think it was his final game this week. Or
buddy.
He was a long time coach down there. Pugh. Okay, yeah. I don't know how.
I might be mispronouncing that. Zach, I need you on Blue. I need you on that one, because I know you know that, and we might be saying it wrong due to lack of familiarity.
Well, and then so I think, and again, I haven't. I'd love to tell you I've spent as much time breaking down some of these at-large teams as I could, but I've obviously had our own local sports scene as well. Buddy Pugh. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, he should be. I mean, he's had a great career anyway, but people kind of forget too. He took down Dion and a couple of his Jackson State teams here the last few years. That I think it was a Celebration Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, or whatever that postseason bowl they had. So they took down. They've been. He's had a hell of a career out there, and there's one I kind of wish we could do a few more of those. Some of those high end teams out down south. I'd love to see them, play a game. That's the debate. What would Jackson State have done in last year's playoffs? I don't know. It's definitely a different. I kind of wish we could cross over a little more with some of them, because it's just a different world down there, and you see the attendance, the bands. Like I said, it's just a different world. It would be a fun world to go down. Same way with the Ivy League. I was a little jealous. I think the week after St. Thomas was at USD, they went to Harvard. Just like I said, just some different places, and it would be fun to have those kind of experiences. But obviously, it's a little different. You can't play round robins, especially when you're in a 8-9 team leagues and whatnot. So, but yeah,
well, I mean, my retirement plans are to hop in an RV with the wife, and we're going to cruise around and visit those places and we're going to go to tailgate at different games around the country to experience, some of the HBCU classic games. Brian Thompson, I'm jealous of him. He was just down at he was just out at NCA&T's homecoming, which looked like an absolute riot. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the cool thing that I've always loved about FCS is there's so many really cool, unique things like that in the FCS, where you can go to Harvard and it is like walking back in time. Like I walked into Cornell Stadium and it is like a door into the history of football, similar to walking into Lambeau Field, except it even feels older. And then you've got the HBCU culture going on where the party outside's bigger than the game and all the stuff going on. And I that's probably my favorite part. And then you can go out in the mountains for the brawl. And I got a feeling there was some brawls after this brawl, but
the brawls might have been within the brawls might have been within the Montana State fan base after that one. I didn't get a chance to watch much of it, but like I said, it was out of hand early. I watched a little more Montana video. I mean, I think from an SDSU standpoint, because I know many of you guys wouldn't want to play USD again just because you don't necessarily like to. I mean, there would be some fun with that just for the build up locally around here. But
we had this conversation at the tailgate.
We've had this conversation.
For the Natty, there's a fair amount of SDSU fans that would like USD to go to the national title. And my apologies, PJ. I know I'm probably your least favorite person of your brothers on the Yotes. But that stadium would be 80% blue. And a lot of SDSU fans are like, fine, send them down there and let's embarrass them and make the whole stadium blue.
Well, I mean, they did show. I mean, they had. Well, here's the thing: I could see it being that way because SDSU fans might have bought up all the tickets beforehand, similar to what we see happen in the Summit League. But I mean, as much as we get on them, when they had their Sweet 16 in Wichita a few years ago with the women, they showed out big for that. They had like 5,000 in Wichita. So I tend to think they would, as rough as it. And like I said last week, they did get about 7,000. And I was depressed because the students didn't show out. They had that 3-day weekend. I mean, I think they would travel. I mean, if they don't travel for that would be. Now, my question would be, okay, by that point, would SDSU fans have bought up all the tickets? Because obviously Jackrabbit fans by now know the lay of the land at Frisco. But I do think I think USD fans would show up, especially if they're playing SDSU in a national championship. If they don't, I don't know what's going on.
Well, here's my thing, and PJ says I feed him motivation from the show. I'm sure you do. There's a reason I specifically talk about their fan base and the athletic department and not the team, because the team's good, and I don't need to feed them extra motivation. But fan base wise, I don't know. And, I had the same thoughts about SDSU before we went to the national title, right? Was, what, SDSU fans would turn out for the national title. And I was right. However, at least there were games where you're drawing 16,000. Like, the thing is, you're looking at the Dakota Dome. It's not even about not filling it. It's about, it's so small and you're not filling it. I mean, it is half the size of the stadium of the Dana, and you're half full. And I get it. SDSU's had their games, but you can't fill it at all season. You can't get 9,000 fans once when you're top 10. I'm sure it would mobilize their fan base, but I would have a hard time seeing the crowd if this were to happen. I think what actually happens is they get their teeth kicked in Missoula, to be honest. Sorry, PJ. But if it were to happen and they pull it off and make it to Frisco, I'd have a hard time seeing more than a third of the stands. A third would be high end being USD fans, even if tickets are available. Because look at the Summit League tournament. They opened up tickets and it's in the backyard, and they still don't read out the tournament. They have better numbers, but that's in Sioux Falls, and it's taken them years. Now I'm behind on comments, so I'm going to let you go so I can catch up on all these.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that, we heard the first few years that the Summit League was going on while they're behind and learning how to buy tickets early, and they've had time now to catch up. I think SDSU's done with the Summit League. I think SDSU's maybe done better promotions in terms of getting people to buy tickets for the Summit League. I think that's helped. And, the other half too is right now we don't know where, USC doesn't have an athletic director right now. So I don't know how that works with them trying to distribute things and whatnot. I don't know. I just think it would be a different situation than a Summit League. Even a conference tournament, I know that's weird to say, but it's a national title and it's your arch rival. It's the one, maybe the once in a lifetime shot. I mean, not to say they would never make, even if they ever got back there again, you can never count that you're ever going to play SDSU again for a national title. Right. I think that would be something that even if people didn't get into the game, I could see a lot of people just going down to be that's one thing I do think USC is pretty good at is they have a good tailgate scene around the dome. Just the one thing I've noticed is a lot of people don't even go into the games sometimes. I mean, it's crazy that the tailgates outside D-Days are fantastic, and then sometimes they just don't even go into the game half the time. So I don't know. I mean, I listened to a little Gaskins podcast the other day. They had Andre Fields on, and he's just like, they got to do it consistently. They've got to do what SDSU did. I mean, you got to win. They got to make this consistent. If they do it consistently, then you can build an atmosphere. Again, obviously, it hurts right now that they don't have an athletic director. I think it would help if they rebuilt the other side of the dome and renovated that up a little bit more. I think that is in the plan eventually. I hope it is, because I think they want to get rid of that pool now that they're going to build a new public pool in Vermilion. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Where's the money coming from?
If you're bringing in a quarter of what SDSU does in the gate, how sustainable is that sort of funding when you're already, and as well as I do, resources matter in the world of college athletics. And if you're getting small crowds and you're already $5 million a year behind SDSU on your budget, and this year SDSU's ticket revenue, I wouldn't be surprised to see it at $5-6 million a year instead of $4 million, and you're at $1 million. That's a huge gap where when it comes to the arms race, at what point is it something that's not sustainable for the university? And that would be my concern for them.
Do want to hit on what Jordan just had, Jordan Fink here. I think he's got a good one because I was bringing this up with some people today, and you mentioned it too. I think if the chalk held, that would be a very tough game for USC to win if they have to go to Washington Grizzly. I don't think they necessarily get smashed because I do think their defense is good enough, and they actually, even a year ago, as bad as they were, they actually were terribly out of that game. That was when their offensive coordinator was going through some things, and the offense was just not doing anything in that game. But I would expect if it were Montana USC, you'd expect Montana to win. I think Montana is the. I think if I'm an SDSU fan, I think that's the one Montana. I think that's the one matchup most Jackrabbit fans before. That's what I was getting to before this. I think it's the one most Jackrabbit fans want to see because it's kind of the final. It is kind of the final thing that's left.
The last dragon to slay. It's the last dragon to slay.
I brought this up with Zimmer today on the sidelines. I'm like, well, Jimmy loves his narratives. That one's going to hit pretty personal for him if it comes up because that's the one that ended his career in that 2009 game, that playoff game. There's a lot of meat on that bone if it gets there because I'm not fully sold yet on the Grizz. They played better, but there's still some things in there that you look back from the early season like, okay, is this for real? I mean, again, I'm not really sold on any team outside of South Dakota State, but yeah, there's a lot of meat on that. But there's a lot of things from the fact that Bobby Hawk is back there. He's a bit of an arrogant guy. There's another word I could use for it, but I'm not gonna. The playoff history, they've had two very difficult playoff games, to put it mildly, when your head coach his career was ended. That's the power program that kind of before everybody was viewed as the Mecca. I mean, their radio guy calls Washington Grizzly the Mecca of FCS football, and you can't necessarily deny that too much. I worked out there for a little while, and it is beautiful. But, the fact Montana doesn't even schedule them, I've always found that kind of odd. They've been willing to schedule USD. Now, we know SDSU's been better, but we've seen Montana State and SDSU fairly regularly scheduling games. You'd think you even saw Montana schedule NDSU. I think it would be, it's definitely kind of the last thing. And Austin's right. I don't think they've ever beaten the Grizzlies. I mean, I don't know about the history from the 50s or before the D1 era. I know they played them one other time, I think in 03 or 04 when they were just transitioning and they got smashed. But yeah, I think that would be the one that that they're a proud fan base that thinks they're on the way back. I think that would be the matchup. I think a lot of Jackrabbit fans, if I'm getting the pulse on, and it'd be somebody new too. You haven't seen them in forever. I think that would be the intriguing one, and it gives them that narrative. It's the one last team out there that you haven't really beat yet. It would certainly be. I think it would be fun in that regard.
That game would be a zoo. Their fans are already chirping SDSU. They've been chirping SDSU for the last 3 weeks. They've been chirping at SDSU fans, and SDSU fans have been chirping back. And it is going to get worse and worse. It's going to be terrible now. They're already throwing the 0-7 all time against this. It's like, dude, that was 8 years ago, and they're basically the clip from Super Bad. People don't forget, and and especially Grizz fans, they never forget, because I mean, if they forgot, then they wouldn't remember being good ever. But
come to Brookings,
Yeah.
guys. I mean, I work. I mean, I get it. I work there in Montana. That stadium is tough as hell to play in. And yes, Matthew, I get it, but who else are you going to put at 3? What other team deserves the 3 seed right now? I get that they're your rival. Who else has done better than them to deserve a 3 seed right now? There's no one. So I'll stop that conversation right there.
If you step back from it as an SDSU fan, number one, SDSU fans and ourselves just generally in the area, it's hard to step back and not look at programs through the lens of how did they play against SDSU. We have an inflated opinion of Southern Illinois because that game was sort of close. It was never in doubt, but it was close. We have an inflated view of Montana State because they played the game close. We have a low opinion of USD because they got pummeled, because we pummeled them. The game against SDSU is not indicative necessarily of what a team is when you look at the whole thing. I do agree they get pummeled, but they absolutely have the 3 resume right now. Montana, with Montana scheduling, if I remember right, and this could be completely wrong, I want to be very clear, this could be completely wrong, but I seem to remember some issues with Montana returning games when home and homes were signed. I believe that might have happened to NDSU. And like, it's a while ago. This wasn't like recent. And that could be some of the reason for the hesitancy, maybe with the Dakota States. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it'd be a fun out of conference matchup to have regularly. You know, I know NDSU went out there the one year, and it feels like I don't remember.
But they never had. They never
came back.
Game. And they did go back in the playoffs that year, and they got smashed.
Yeah, and NDS. If we know one thing about NDSU, they're like SDSU. They're not doing a one-off to your place. They'll sign a home and home. We're not a one-off visiting team. You're coming back, and that feels like one that maybe got backed out on. And you know, we do know that while there's a large rivalry between SDSU and NDSU, the athletic departments are fairly friendly with each other when it comes to things of that nature and moves and all that jazz. So I'm sure they talk to each other, and maybe, you know, Larson talks to Sells like, I can't believe they did this to us, and Sells like, well, screw that, I'm not going to sign up for that. Who knows? But
well, I mean, I know, and I'm not 100% on this, so if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me. If Zach's on here, he can correct me too. Before the FCS playoffs started seeding, it was almost all, I think it was mostly bid process. Like you could that's basically a big reason Montana, I'm not going to say it's the only reason Montana was so great when they were, because they were, I mean, again, before the Jacks and the Bison got playoff eligible, they were the Grizz went to a lot of national title games. I mean, they didn't win that many. Of course, they won one with Joe Glenn. Hawk went to about 3 in a row before he left for UNLV and just kind of bombed there. But there was essentially a time where you could buy your home games. If you had good attendance, you were going to get all the home games. It wasn't really done with seeding. That's something that's been a big effect, I think, on Montana. It's changed them, is that they couldn't buy all the home games anymore. Once they got seeded and then they had to go on the road, okay, it's not, you know, it's a big difference. So, but you look at their non-conferences, they used to play a lot of Division II teams. That's another thing that had to change too, because when they weren't as good, then those D2 teams, those wins didn't count for anything. So, I mean, it was pretty rare they were even playing FBS games. They wanted to play as many home games as they could. Of course, they get good gates when you're getting 25,000, I think it is, at the end of that. But I'm looking at their future their schedule next year is at least as we talk about the SoCon teams not coming up. Their schedule next year is they have Missouri State at home for their opener, ironically. They go to North Dakota. They have Morehead State at home. That is the FCS one, not the one up in Minnesota. And then they have West Carolina at home. So it's kind of an interesting little schedule. But their only other games in the future are they have North Dakota again. They have Indiana State at home. I know they played Indiana State last year. Missouri State again. They got more games with Utah Tech. So they don't really. They're non-conference, and again, to be fair, we've said you shouldn't kill yourself with non. But it is very bizarre that they've never played South Dakota State, and like we said, they've done a lot with South Dakota, and then the Coyotes have actually played them well in a couple of games too. They've even come to Vermillion twice. So you'd think one time in there they would have played the Jackrabbits. They played them, I think it was about 2003 or 2004. It was sometime early in the transition. They routed them. And there's even this kind of storyline too of the fact that people forget NDSU and SDSU when they made the transition, their target was the Big Sky. It wasn't the Valley. I mean, there was the Gateway at the time, and I wasn't in on it, but obviously that did not come to pass. I don't remember the whole. You wonder now if there is some buyer's remorse in that, because I mean, obviously they tried to go with that route when they accepted UND, and they were going to accept USD until the Valley kind of made that last minute move. You wonder how much different both those all the programs would be if they were in the Valley, if they were in the Big Sky right now. Maybe the recruiting footprint's different. Maybe they're not the superpowers they are now. So there's there would be a lot of meat on that bone if it's Montana and SDSU. But like you said, I do think if it's USD, I don't think it would be the blowout people are thinking it would be if it's USD Montana. I think they would have given them a decent game. I think maybe it ends up getting away from them in the fourth quarter, but I think the defense would have enough to go up there and keep it close and maybe give them a shot. Just depends on how especially if they get to that point, because I've said with USD, they could be done on the first day, or they could get that win and roll with it from there, because we just don't. It's going to be such an unknown of what they're going to do, and they've only won one playoff game in their history, and they've never been a high seed like this. So how are you going to handle this pressure? How are you going to handle this moment? Obviously, they have guys like Josh Davis who knows what the playoffs are about. Nielsen's won a national title at the Division II level, so they've got coaches who do know a little bit of what playoff pressure is. But if they get to the semifinals at that point, I think they'll have a shot to keep it close. And they've played Montana, like I said, they played Montana over the years close. I don't think this is a Grizz team that's like to the level of SDSU where they're for sure they seem like a surefire thing. I think anything could happen on that other end of the bracket. I think anything could happen. Nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility. However, like
I like Dan's prediction.
I like Dan's
prediction right there.
Yeah, that's not terrible. I don't think USD's defense is. I think they're comparable with Montana State's, and we saw what Montana just did to Montana State's defense. Now, rivalry game, all that jazz, but on the flip side, large crowd, semifinal environment, that can get away in a hurry, and so I could see them getting smashed fairly easily, especially semifinals. That tends to happen to teams. It happened to SDSU a couple times where second half it just blows away on you, and you're sitting here going, "Oh Jesus," So,
well, and the other thing the Coyotes will have to watch out for, they've been pretty lucky. They haven't really had a lot of injury issues. I don't like I said, I don't know what's been going on. I don't know what's been going on with Nate Thomas, because I thought he would start playing more, and then they've kept him in the garage. Maybe they'll bring him out. They've got a lot of good depth at running back, but if their defensive line started taking a lot of injuries, then I think they'd be in trouble, because they don't have the depth yet to contend with. If they have some stud linemen up front with Gase and Webb. If those guys go down, then I don't know how they're going to maintain that. So, but yeah, like I said, if they got to the semifinal alone, I wouldn't just pencil it in as an automatic L if they have to go to Washington Grizzly, but it would certainly be an uphill battle. It always is if you have to go there. But if you're at that point, you should at that. I almost feel like they're playing with house money. If they win their first game, then I feel like they're playing with house money, because nobody knows what to make of USD. Nobody knows what to expect of them.
Right.
Just get in and that's why they, it's the same thing if they made the title game with SDSU. No one's going to expect them to be close. Go in and shoot your shot at that point. And then if you lose by 30 again, well, that's what's supposed to happen. If you go to Montana and you lose by 30, well, that's probably what's supposed to happen. If they get past that first game and they can make a run, I think if they get past that first game, their chances of making that run certainly skyrocket. Whereas obviously, if they lose, they're out. I guess that's not much of a statement to make. If they get past their first game, their chances of making a run skyrocket. Well, if they don't get past the first game, you're done. So great.
And if they score more points than the other team in that game, their chances of winning are higher.
That's the insight you come for at nearly 1 a.m. kids.
It's our 1 a.m. insight. First off, Ron, I'm going to give you some shit. Obviously, it's not that hatred of a rival if you're on here bragging about Montana's stadium. You'll never hear me brag about the Fargo Dome. That's for sure. But I know it's an intense rivalry, but God, you guys perplex me with how you guys can cheer for each other. It's hilarious. Matt, I think we talked about this a little bit. I think that Youngstown State it'll be Youngstown State or Sac State, I think, is going to get the shaft, and Incarnate Word is going to bump them out. I think that's entirely possible. And I don't think it'll be right. In general, my disdain for Youngstown State and their complaints has been pretty strong. However, I would have a gripe with them. I don't think the Incarnate Word has been deserving of being ranked all year. If they do get ranked, it'll be because of the coaches poll, because the coaches just don't pay attention because they're doing their job coaching. But Dan asks, is Montana State who we thought they were? SDSU is only firing on 5 out of 8 cylinders. And we've talked about this a bunch. I think they are 2021 SDSU. I think if they end up on the non-SDSU side of the bracket, they absolutely have the potential to go, if they're unseeded even, and run to the semifinals. I think they'll run out of gas, just like SDSU did in the semifinals. But I think they have that potential in them. I still think they're a good team. I just don't think they've given themselves that great of a shot. Practice for the noise. You're warning me. Watch out. Ryan's going to get me.
Montana, it was a different game. It was the second game of the year for both teams. I think they were, you saw both teams weren't necessarily their best, and Montana State was keyed up. They'd been gunning for that game for.
They were way up.
Yeah. So, but would I still be a little nervous to see them coming in here? Absolutely. You never know. As good as this SDSU team is, again, I've said this a couple times in the last few weeks. We forget how close Holy Cross was with them in the fourth quarter of that game.
Right.
If they don't go for a long field goal and they just decide to go for a 4th and short when they were running all over SDSU, maybe they take the lead in the fourth quarter. And how different is that game? I don't know. You just never know. You're always one bad game away, or maybe the weather's turns here.
Right.
So as good as this SDSU team is, I think they're the best bet. But you never know what's going to happen. You never know what could happen in the playoffs. That's why it's the playoffs. I think to the Youngstown point that he asked, I think they're going to get in. I don't really know that they deserve it, but I think just so much happened today, and so much with the SoCon, as we discussed earlier, so much with the SoCon has happened. I could see Incarnate. I think if it's between them and Youngstown, if it is between them and Sac State and Incarnate Word were to bump one of the two, I think they'll let Youngstown in this time, just because Youngstown, they'll be like, okay, we shafted you last year. You guys get the bump this year. And Sacramento State's been has been slumping a little more. I think they've lost. They got beat badly at Montana their last time out, and they lose today. I think it would be Sac State that got the shaft, but I wouldn't be shocked if they both get in. Like you said, a lot of it depends on will Incarnate Word get that last bid, and if they don't, then I think for sure you'll see both. I think the Valley will get the 6 teams in because, like I said, like we've said, everything broke the Valley's way, and no other conference has really stepped up and done enough to take anything away.
Well, and one we didn't mention that opened up another at-large spot that probably would have been taken is UT Martin losing. They lost to Sanford. So now you have UT Martin losing. That opens a spot. You've got Western Carolina losing. That opens a spot. It's not at nearly as tight, which is not surprising. this happens every year. We feel like there's going to be 37 teams vying for that last spot, and 35 of them choke and screw it up, and you end up with 2 teams that are arguing over that last spot. Jordan Fink asks how high of a seed NDSU could get. No way they get a 6. No way in hell. If that happens, I'm burning the committee down. I'm locking them in a room and burning the building down. That would be horrific. 8 seed or nothing. That's what they're sitting at.
Well, and Zach made a good point too. I forgot they had that Stanford win. I shouldn't have forgotten that.
Yeah.
But especially since he came against their former coach. I would think that'll be I don't know that Incarnate Word is going to get that. But the other thing that's interesting with Incarnate is they had that forfeit game too with Northwestern, because Northwestern had the player, the murder within the team, and then they shut their season down. I mean, Incarnate's loss right now, they got that one to Nichols, but Nichols is an automatic qualifier now. I mean, they don't have anything on their. They beat something called North American, which is apparently a real college other than the continent. Yeah. I mean, I if it were me and if I were on the committee, I would put Sac State and Youngstown in, just because I don't think anybody else has really earned it. But yeah, like you said, it could. There always tends to be somebody that gets in who you can't really make a case for, you don't understand.
Yep.
Yeah, so that could well happen. But yeah, as we're sitting here now getting near 10 till 1 a.m., we should probably shut down. This is our longest one yet.
It's 10 till 1. I'm talking about burning people in buildings, which, yes, I'm with Seth Meyer. Disclaimer, do not lock people in a building and light it on fire, kids. That was a joke. It is really late. We do need to.
I will say, Jordan, yes, it would shock me if they're a 6. They're not that.
Yes.
They're not getting that high. That would be some serious freaking backroom. Somebody paid somebody a princely sum. I mean, I guess nothing's new under the sun, but that would you jump them up, and that's not to say I don't think they couldn't go and beat the teams that are going to be seated ahead of them.
Right.
You tell me they could absolutely go to Idaho or Villanova or Furman and win those games. I'm not saying that isn't possible, but their resume, they haven't done enough. The loss to UND alone is going to drag them down significantly. And the loss to USD now looks better, but it was not a top 10 loss at the time. So they're not gonna get to a 6. I could see them maybe getting to the 7 if Furman is completely nudged out, and they say, and then they say, okay, we're gonna, and that would be, again, we've discussed that, because I still think that's unlikely that Furman's completely washed out. But if Furman were to get washed out, and then it's between Montana State and NDSU, then I could see NDSU getting the 7, because Montana State's, as we've said all along, they're not playing that well. But if you're going to keep them in, you might as well keep them at the 8.
Yeah, and Seth says we thought last year Montana State was locked for a 3, and they gave it to NDSU. There's a big difference between sliding one slot and a whole from 8 to 6, especially when you consider the resumes. Like you said, it's not that we don't think they can beat those teams, but you don't get seeded off of who I think you can beat. You get seeded off of what you've done, and what NDSU's done is fringe 8 team. Like you said, I could see him sliding above Furman. There's even more conspiracy theory if they slide over Furman because of that loss, and now they get to be on the 7 away from SDSU. But I don't see him going all the way up to 6. I mean, you've got Villanova, who's 9-1 against the FCS, and as of last year is a conference that had 6 bids. You have Albany and all these teams with really good resumes.
Oh. I turned my cam off. Hit the wrong button there for a second. It's getting late. As we get ready to wrap this up. No, I think one thing about last year that people thought it was weird that Montana State. I just thought that was all about, look, you've got your 2 best conferences. You want the 1 and you want the 2 on different sides of the bracket, so that you wanted it potentially to have your first place. You didn't want your first place Missouri Valley and your second place Missouri Valley team to meet in the semifinals. Ideally, you wanted your first place Valley and your second place Big Sky and your first place Big Sky and your second place Valley teams to meet. So that's how you had that set up a year ago. It was SDSU was the one. Montana State was, and they were tied with Sacramento State, but Sacramento State was technically, I think it was more or less considered the one because they had an FBS win and they were also undefeated. So Sac State got the 2. It was set up to where it would have been NDSU going to Sac State. Well, of course, Sac State loses. So one of the reasons I could maybe even see that 7 and 8 thing happen, because then you would or even see just Montana State get the 8th seed in general, because then you would still have that scenario where your first and second place Valley and Big Sky teams are on opposite ends of the bracket, because you'll have the first and second place Big Sky and Valley teams will be obviously Montana and USD at the 2 and the 3. It'll look, now obviously they wouldn't meet in the semifinals, but if you have SDSU at 1 and Montana State at 8, then you could still set that matchup up. It's just going to be in the quarterfinals. So I could definitely see that happening similar way. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think when you have your best conference, you can't always set it up like that because it wouldn't be fair. But when you have your best conferences, you don't want to have your first and second place team meeting in the quarterfinals or the semifinals. I think you want to have them on the opposite ends of the bracket to see, and of course, then there are people who are crying that you're favoring the league and we don't want to see another All Valley championship. Well, do you really want to see? I mean, I don't know. The first Valley championship that I remember was Illinois State and NDSU and came down to the final minute. And the second one, that was a blowout, but it's kind of hard to dispute that anybody else deserved to get there when Incarnate Word couldn't finish the deal at NDSU. So, usually I think the best teams will make it. The best teams will get to Frisco. So I think, I could still see Montana State getting that 8 just because it would still keep the top teams from the top leagues separated. And, just would mean that you would get the first and second place Valley and Big Sky team meeting a round earlier than normal if chalk held. But, and again, I wouldn't necessarily say that chalk might hold. You never know what's going to happen at this thing, man. I mean,
right.
I think everything outside of SDSU is probably a crapshoot at this point. I think looking at and the other thing you have to figure too is, again, it's almost impossible to project as we wrap this up, it's almost impossible to project what those other matchups are going to be on Thanksgiving weekend at this point.
Right.
Assume they're going to be regional. Had Northern Iowa won, I would have bet you $1 million they'd have been playing Drake. That won't happen. Yeah. I would guess pretty good chance maybe Drake goes to North Dakota or North Dakota State or Montana State.
Yeah.
I would say good chance if North Dakota State's a seed, maybe North Dakota's funneled there. Maybe North Dakota's funneled to South Dakota. That'll all shake out. I do think you'll see probably the 2 bubble teams, maybe the 2. And the thing is, next year, I think they're hoping to see the team one. We're hoping to see it seeded 1 through 16 next year.
Which would be awesome.
That'll help a lot. Then we'll kind of have a better idea of where everything's going. But I think you'll see the winner of whoever SDSU faces will probably be maybe the last 2 bubble teams in. I think that's, in theory, that's normally, I think, how it's supposed to work, is that the number 1 seed tends to get what was supposed to be the lower end matchup. Although, I don't know. I mean, I could see them maybe I could see North Dakota getting funneled here too, just because North Dakota's been so bad. Maybe they're the last team in. I don't know. NDSU Drake would be a bloodbath. We know that, but we'll see. It'll all play itself out. That selection show is 11:30 on ESPNU as we wrap this up at 1 a.m. on the dime, or 2 a.m. if you're watching us out east.
Yep. And the show's on ESPN, but all of you watching us on YouTube, we are on the FN Network, as I like to call them, the FCS Fans Nation Network. They will have their live show simulcast with the ESPN show. So if you want actual analysis instead of the schmucks that are on TV and Jay Walker who don't know anything about the FCS and call South Dakota State, San Diego State, and all that other stupid crap. If you don't want to listen to those yahoos.
We start putting a money line on how much San Diego State video we're going to see in this.
No, oh my God. Yeah, we get We get into that rabbit hole, we'll be on for another hour, and I'm trying to keep it under 2 hours, but watch the FCS Fans Nation live show. It'll be a lot better insight. They know what's going on. There'll be actual conversation of, ooh, I thought these guys were going to go here and here, instead of, well, this will be a good matchup, I think, because they won the Pioneer League. Shut up. So with that, we are going to.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're probably not going to be back next week because obviously we don't have an STSU game. Yeah. And, we want to spend time with our families on Thanksgiving weekend. We'll figure once we know the playoff. I mean, we know, and somebody mentioned this earlier. Yeah, I believe the quarterfinals are all Saturday. There could be an STSU game that's on a Friday. That could happen if they keep advancing into the semifinals and the quarterfinals. That could happen because ESPN likes to televise a Friday night game, and they're not going to have their darling NDSU, we think, at this point to televise. So that could certainly happen, that SDSU is getting a primetime game. We just don't know yet. We're not going to know until basically the week of. But we'll definitely have a post-game show. We'll definitely have these post-game shows for the playoffs, and we'll adjust accordingly. But in either way, guys, enjoy Thanksgiving weekend. Check some of these games out. We'll have plenty of coverage. I'll be at SDSU's. They got a gathering tomorrow, I think, at the stadium. They're going to be the least drama-filled watch thing they've ever had for this. I can tell you that. USD, I know, is doing one down at the Dome as well. So we've got teams that are going to be at both of those. So we're going to have a lot of sound and reaction from everybody tomorrow. Shout out Augustana. Beat the crap out of Mankato in the playoffs today. They're moving on. Hopefully they can beat Mines next week. But, yeah, everybody enjoy Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll talk to you for our first playoff show, hopefully our first of many playoff shows here in a couple weeks.
Yep. Check out A-Team. They're going to have a guest, I believe, on Sunday. That'll be on Sunday night. Check those guys out and all that jazz. B-Team during the week, and we are out. Eventually.